We're going to talk about frame animation as opposed to a video timeline in Photoshop. I'll talk about what some of the advantages are, how to set up a new animation and what the settings should be, how to adjust the transparency grid so that you don't get a checkered background, how to add layers using a hotkey, how to make the animation actually work by doing something called make frames from layers, how to loop the playback, how to duplicate layers using a hotkey, how to refresh the timeline for the animation, and how to change the duration of each individual frame. So first thing we're going to do is create the settings for our new animation. I'm going to go to Photoshop, File, New, and under Document Type I'm going to select Film and Video. Under Size I'm going to select HD TV 1080p, and automatically the rest of this should be self-populated as 1920 by 1080 by 72. Those are standard HD TV settings. 72 is the resolution, and these are the number of pixels wide by 1080, which is your standard screen on a computer right now in 2017. Okay, so there is my document. Let me go back. So new animation settings, that's what we just did. The transparency grid, that's the next thing I want to do. So we're not going to really notice the transparency until I delete the background. So let me just create a new layer here down at the bottom. This is create new layer. Then I'm going to select my background layer by actually clicking on it until I see it highlighted. And then I'm going to hit the delete button. And I have actually already changed my transparency settings. So let me just put it back there so you can see it. So when the background layer automatically has a solid white background, when I create a new layer and I delete that, you're going to see this grid, which indicates that the background is transparent. The grid is only there to let you know that. But it can be a little bit confusing when you start to draw. So we're just going to take away the illusion. So we're going to go to Photoshop Preferences, Transparency, and where it says grid size, I'm going to select that and I'm going to say none. So that's what I had previously. So you can still see in the layers palette that you have the grid there, which indicates that this is in fact transparent. That's important because when we export the video, it automatically will export whatever is solid color onto a black background. So if we are drawing in black and this is a known transparent layer, when I export it, it's going to be black on black. So if you ever export a video from Photoshop, a video animation from Photoshop, and it comes out all black, come back in and realize that that has to do with transparency, which means we have to either fill in our object or we have to create a layer, usually using the video timeline, which would have to be an alteration from this to video. But we don't have to worry about that right now. Right now we're just going to work on the transparent background. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing, and then I'm going to add layers. And then I'm going to do something called make frames from layers to show you how you can view the animation in frame animation. So in this first layer, I'm going to go ahead and draw something just very simple. And then I can either come down here to the bottom and do new layer. And from there, I can go to the first layer, and if I want, I can reduce the opacity of that. Now, if I wanted this at 50% opacity, for example, I could hold down the V key and type V5. Just don't touch anything else on the keyboard, just V and then hit 5, and that will set it to 50%. Here, I'll show you. I'm going to do V3. Oops, sorry. Don't want to actually be on that opacity layer. I'm going to do V3. V3, that put it to 30%. Let me do V8. You see how that pushed it up to 80%. V10, that pushed it down to 10%. If I do V0, that pushes it back up to 100%. So even if I take this down to 50%, just so that's really just to create the illusion of an onion skin, because we don't right now have onion skin in frame animation. Then later, before I export this, I'm going to need to put all these layers back up to 100% by selecting them all and doing V100. But we're not there yet, so I'm just going to bring down the opacity on this. Make sure that I click on the top layer. Always make sure you're very aware of which layer you're working on, because you don't want to accidentally work on the bottom layer. If you do make those accidents, you're going to have to go to your history palette, go back in time. This is each step that you've done so far, and undo that mistake. So I'm going to go to the top layer. I'm going to type B for brush. I can use the square brackets on my keyboard near the P key to increase or decrease the brush size. So that's increasing, it's decreasing. And I'm just going to do this just like an onion skin. I'm going to enlarge that a little bit. Then this one I am going to do, sometimes we might have to hit escape to get out of a selection mode. Select the layer, do V5, and then new layer again. Hit B for brush, or come over here and select the brush tool. Enlarge that a little bit more. Come back here, hit V5 again, hit escape, click off of it, select the layer, V5. You don't have to do the V5 if you don't want to. Now, when we start creating a lot of new layers, sometimes you might want to know what the hotkeys are. So adding a layer is Shift plus Command plus N. So just holding down the Shift and Command key at the same time. If you're on a PC, then it's Shift and Control. Control and Command on a Mac, it's Command. On a PC, the same thing is called Control. So I'm going to go back over here. So if I do, click off of that, Shift, come back here, N. I already forgot what the number was, letter was. Shift Command N. Okay, so I want to have this top layer selected. Shift Command N, new, and I can say yes. Let's call that layer 4. Hit B for brush, and let me just go and do a new layer on top of that. Turn off this bottom layer, Shift Command N. I can hit the return key for that rather than having to actually click on it. And here I'm going to opt not to change the opacity. I think I can do well enough without having to have that extra step. Shift Command N, hit the return key, turn off the lower, no, actually I want to keep that. Okay. So now, however far I've come, I want to preview this as an animation. So down here on the timeline, and if you don't see the timeline, what you can do is come up to Windows, and you can either choose to make the timeline visible or layers visible, or you can go to Workspaces and choose Motion, and that brings up most of what you're going to want for this. If you get extra items, you can, let me just go and actually reset my workspace here. So sometimes you'll get some extra items. What we really want is layers and history. So if I have extras, I can pull them out and delete them. because I know I'm going to have a lot of layers and I'm going to want a lot of space for those. And I actually don't need channels, so I'm going to delete that. But what I probably will need is history. So I'm going to bring that up and I'm going to bring this over until it turns blue. You'll see that things can snap into place. And then I'll pull actions out. I pull it out just so that I can hit the little X mark and delete it. And now I can go back and forth between my layers, and if I need to go back in time, I can click on my history palette. So now that I've done that, I've got my timeline down here. And previously we used a video timeline. This time we're going to use frame animation. But either way, whichever one we select, after we've selected it, we have to actually click on it. So now it has actually turned this into a frame animation timeline, but as you can see, I don't see anything happening here yet. So this little drop down that's on this long timeline, this is where I'm going to create the frame animation. So I'm going to do this by scrolling up or down to make frames from layers. So these are the frames, these are the layers, and I want to make these frames based on these layers. Now there are much more complex ways of arranging these layers and having some visible and some not visible, but we're going to do a simple, only one frame at a time is visible on the timeline. So make frames from layers, and let me go ahead and play. Here we go. Just come back over to my table of contents. So we just did the makes frames from layers. Now let's look at loop playback and then what duplicate layers can do for us. So let me come back here. So the way we loop the playback in frame animation is down here where it says once. I click on that and go to forever. And then I can either press the play button or I can press the space bar. And now it will loop my playback. So the next thing I want to do is look at what is one of the big advantages of working in frame animation is that we can create animations that are based on addition and subtraction. So far this has been based on growth and change. If I come up to the top layer here, so let's say I have this circle and it's grown in size, and now I want that circle to stay put, but I want to add more circles. So I'm going to click on this, and I can either go to the drop down, which allows me to duplicate the layer, or, as the table of contents reminds us, I can go to I can hold down Command J, and that will duplicate that layer. Now we need to make sure again that on the layers palette, that's the layer that's selected. That's the only one that's going to be duplicated. So first I'll do it through actually going to the drop down and saying duplicate layer. And now if I'm in the brush tool, Command B, I can add something to this. And now what I'm going to do is so I don't get too confused, I'm going to delete the layer. I'm just going to turn off the eyeball visibility on the layer underneath. I do Command J. Actually, since I'm not changing anything, I don't necessarily have to turn that eyeball off. Do Command J. And you kind of have to play around with this just to get the feel. I could even add on in more than one place, as long as I don't add anything too big or too many at one time. Command J again. As you can tell, I don't have my tablet hooked up, so these are somewhat rickety. Okay, now let's take a look at the timeline. Let me go ahead and press play. Okay, you can see that looks really weird. So you just have to get used to the fact that this timeline is going to get messed up and not worry about it. So in order to sorry, I just got a warning that my Mac is too hot. So I'm going to prop it up on something to cool it. So what we're going to do is we're going to update the make frames from layers. In order to do that, we're going to get rid of what's down here. So we're just going to get rid of this and then we're going to update it. So to do that, I go to the drop down here and I go to delete animation. Don't worry, you're not deleting anything permanently. You're really just deleting the frames on the timeline. Then we go back to the drop down, pop up, and go to make frames from layers. And now it has all of my new frames. I'm already set to forever. If I hit the space bar or hit play, you can see now it grows and then there are additions. Hit space bar again to pause. If this was not already selected, I'm going to go back to the top layer. Now let's talk about erasure. So I can take this layer and I can Command J to duplicate it. And if I'm going to do erasure, I am going to turn off the bottom layer, otherwise I will not see the erasure. I'm going to switch to the eraser tool, which is E down here. And on that one, I'll probably increase the size a little bit. Oops, got off of it somehow. And erasure usually with animation works best if the hardness is at 100%. So what I want to do is take something away. And the reason I don't want to have that layer underneath is because it still has that, that circle or more like stone on it. So let me take this and do Command J, turn off the one underneath. Let me take away another stone. Command J, turn off the one underneath, take away another one. I can even take off more than one at a time. I can always switch back to brush and touch something up, or I can go to history if I take away too much. Command J, click E for eraser. I can hit the square brackets to shorten the size, make the size smaller. Command J. And now let's update the timeline. Go back to the timeline, go to delete animation. Back here, make frames from layers. And now you see that we have growth, we have accumulation, and then we have deleting. Now this is actually playing pretty slow, probably something to do with my computer. Normally 0 seconds plays really fast. So if you want to slow that down, you click on the first frame, you scroll all the way over until you get to the last frame, and you hold down Shift and click on that last frame. That way you have all of them selected. Then you can go to any one of them once you have all of them selected and click on the number of seconds, and usually 0.1 or 0.2. I like 0.1, but it really depends on your taste. And then when you play it, it will move even a bit more slowly. Let me make that more extreme just so you can see it. Put it at 0.5, and now let me play it. So you can see that that changes the timing on every frame. And that is pretty much what we've covered for this tutorial. So again, these are the steps. Feel free to freeze the frame on this tutorial to make sure that you have covered all the steps. And good luck.